But back to the original point, though, MCC was a good program. Middle East Partnership Initiative, another program coming out of State Department. PEPFAR, the President's Global AIDS Initiative, all good programs, but all of them contributed to what is the fragmentation we've seen in the foreign assistance bureaucracy, where you've got different power centers. You've got AID, which has been really, I'd say, cratered as a development organization because it's basically relying on contractors and NGOs to do its job. You've got MCC over here. You've got state giving assistance. You've got DOD now doing 20% of development aid. You've got PEPFAR. You have all these different power centers. And so one of the things we looked at in the report was how do you end this sort of fragmentation? And our big a takeaway was you need to create a development assistance agency, a cabinet level agency that basically is responsible for all U.S. development and democracy assistance. In fact, for all U.S. foreign assistance that isn't political in nature. And I think that came really away from seeing how do you, again, get back to the three issues I raised earlier. How do you depoliticize aid? How do you cut out the fragmentation, and how do you make it more effective?
I guess, and you call this new agency the sort of Department of International Development.
International Development, yes.
There have been over the last few months. It seems that the aid community, the sort of foreign development community here in Washington and in NGOs in New York and elsewhere sense an opportunity now to press forward this kind of agenda, an agenda that you outlined for foreign assistance reform. And you're now the second report I've seen that calls for a creation of a new cabinet agency, a group called, I'm sure you're probably familiar with, called the Modernizing Foreign Assistance Network, calls for what they call it a global development cabinet level agency. Yes. And incidentally, I had Ray Offenheiser of Oxfam on this program a few months ago to talk about that. But I mean, it seems to me that that this is a worthy goal and a worthwhile goal, and many European countries have their own cabinet level ministers for development. But
sure.
It seems like an awfully tough political fight to have to create this new department, and it seems you seem to think it's a fight worth having, though, correct?
I think it's a fight you have to have, and I'm not, I recognize the challenges, and if you look at the way the Obama administration has approached these issues to date, it's not a lot of reason for confidence, frankly. They haven't appointed an AID administrator. They haven't appointed an Undersecretary for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. MCC has also not gotten a new administrator. There's a lack of focus, I think, from the Obama administration on these issues. Mm-hmm. Nonetheless, there has to be a recognition that our civilian agencies, and I think this is a recognition, by the way, that goes across political spectrum. Our civilian agencies have been seriously demoralized and seriously negatively affected over the last 8 years. They are not functioning as well as they can. AID has become, I think what everyone would agree, nothing more than a contracting agency. And the military is taking over a lot of these responsibilities. So you kind of have to begin this debate somewhere. Are we going to have civilian agencies that are focused on doing long-term development? Are we going to have civilian agencies focused on promoting democracy? And if we are, we can't continue down the road that we've been going, because the system just doesn't work. It doesn't serve the needs of the people they're trying to help. It doesn't really, I think, serve the taxpayers effectively either. So I think that while maybe, it might be a hard hill to climb, and I'm not going to deny that, to get to a cabinet-level agency, we have to start this conversation somewhere. I think, frankly, the best place to start is a recognition that AID has been seriously undercut. They've lost capacity, and that capacity has to be rebuilt.
And it seems to me that you probably know the history of this deeper than I, but most of the capacity was lost in sort of the 80s and early 90s, right?
This is a bipartisan effort.
Right.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think
the Clinton administration
AID at its height was at its height during the Vietnam era, where it had tens of thousands of more employees than it does now, and employees out in the field, like you said, most of what it does now is issue contracts.
Absolutely. I was at a conference a few weeks ago, and I heard that AID has, I think, a dozen economists on its payroll and less than 10 engineers, which is for a development organization is really crazy. But to your point, really quickly, I mean, this is a bipartisan effort in which I think the Clinton administration deserved a lot of blame for this by agreeing to fold AID into state, which I think really is one of the reasons why I've had such a problem. When they have to share resources with state, inevitably development is, because there's not a real constituency for it in this country, is really going to get affected negatively, and I think that's what's happened. I think also what's happened is that state has taken over a lot more of assistance responsibilities. It's a funny sort of situation. People don't trust AID. They don't trust AID to be an effective implementer of programs. That's one of the reasons why MEPI, Middle East Partnership Initiative, was created in state. At least that's my theory on that, at least. It's one of the reasons why MCC, I think, was created as a separate organization, as sort of a quasi-government corporation. And I think that, you have to sort of make a decision. Do you think AID is important? Do you think it has a role to play? And if so, then let's find a way to fix it. But if not, then let's do something different. But you can't continue down the same road you're on.
I guess, how does your new Department of International Development avoid what seems to be a big problem with U.S. foreign assistance, and that is, each members of Congress, they're the ones who, in the end, appropriate funding for USAID and for foreign assistance more generally, and many members of Congress have their own parochial interests that they'd like to see implemented. USAID or development might not have a large constituency here in the United States, but there are certainly diaspora communities that
Sure.
influence how their member of Congress acts. And so, it seems that you have all these different interests at play, and it's hard for me to see how creating a new cabinet level agency somehow gets beyond those sort of the members of Congress pursuing their own parochial interests in foreign development assistance.
You're always going to, this is a real problem, obviously. The earmarking to death of AID has been happening for a very long time. One of the rationales behind MCC, and one of the reasons why I think MCC is a good program, is it creates a situation that would kind of, I don't know if it would end completely, but would certainly diminish this earmarking. Because what it basically would do is say countries aren't going to get money if they don't fulfill certain criteria. So I think the more money that you can move through MCC would be a more effective, first of all, be more effective assistance, but I think it would be one way of undercutting the dynamic that you talked about. I think the other thing you need to do is think about how do you delineate different types of assistance. In other words, how do you differentiate between political assistance, which basically is geared towards short-term political goals, whether it be the aid we give to Israel and Egypt as part of the Camp David Accords, whether it's aid we give to Pakistan to fight Al Qaeda, which has also not been used terribly effectively. The way, and to my mind, that money should be going through the State Department, and AID should be really focused on these sort of long-term foreign policy objectives. And there needs to be, when the foreign, of course, to do this, you'd have to rewrite the Foreign Assistance Act. And I think one of the elements of how you rewrite that act is you make it more difficult for Congress to basically demand that AID fund this priority or that priority. It's a difficult goal to achieve, but again, unless you can get past this notion of basically this sort of parochialism you talk about, you're still going to have AID not operating effectively as it should be.